Hello everyone, welcome back. This is a story from Her Silent Revenge, and it has taken a turn you absolutely didn't expect. Let's begin.
My sister ruined my wedding when I was 26, but that was just the beginning. Hours before I was due to walk down the aisle, a perfectly orchestrated family emergency caused everything to fall apart. I stood silently by the window, watching the food trucks disappear into the darkness, believing I had just lost the man I loved most. But I was wrong. The chaos wasn't random. It was meticulously planned. And the next morning, when I opened my laptop and checked a few seemingly harmless things, I discovered that the canceled wedding was just a cover for a much larger plan, a plan aimed directly at my life. I'm so grateful you're here. Before we begin, drop a quick comment and let me know. Where are you watching from your commute lunch break or late at night when the world's finally quiet? I'd love to know. A gentle reminder that the catering van pulled out of the driveway at exactly 11:52 p.m., and I stood at my bedroom window watching my wedding disappear into the night. I didn't cry. Crying required energy I no longer had. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and watched the taillights fade down Pelican Crest Drive, taking with them 3 years of secret savings and a future I'd foolishly believed I deserved. $12,000. That's what I'd managed to squirrel away by working freelance projects my family knew nothing about. While they slept, I built spreadsheets for strangers, balanced books for small businesses, and slowly constructed an escape fund disguised as a wedding budget. The dress hanging in the spare room cost $800, not because I wanted something cheap, but because every dollar I didn't spend on myself was a dollar I could use to leave, except now there was nowhere to go. Not tomorrow at noon when I was supposed to walk down an aisle at Beringer Vineyards in Napa Valley, surrounded by 120 guests who'd bought plane tickets and reserved hotel rooms to watch me promise forever to a man who probably wasn't answering his phone right now because he was trying to understand what had just happened to us. My phone sat face down on the dresser. I'd stopped checking it after the 7th text from Lindsay, my maid of honor, and the only person who never made me feel like I owed her for existing. The phone had buzzed itself into silence and I'd let it. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, the wedding's off. My sister had another crisis. Yes again. No, I don't know what happened. Yes, it's the night before. The house was too quiet. My parents had left 2 hours earlier their Mercedes SUV spraying gravel as they rushed out like this was an actual emergency. Blair, my 24-year-old sister, the family's resident damsel in perpetual distress, had collapsed. Panic attack, according to my mother's text. They were at Hoag Hospital's emergency room. They needed to hold space for her grief. I pulled out my phone and reread the message I'd memorized. We have to cancel tomorrow. Blair collapsed, panic attack. We're at Hoag Hospital ER. She needs us. Please reschedule. Family first. Mom. Family first. In the Prescott family, that meant Blair first parents, second Nora, never. I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes. Gutted, absolutely. But not surprised. Blair's crises had taken precedence for as long as I could remember, and I'd stopped counting around 16. I'd always been cast as the stagehand essential invisible. Age 8. My birthday. I woke up expecting pancakes and candles. Instead, I found my parents loading presents into the car. Blair's princess party is today's sweetheart, my mother said. We'll do yours next weekend. Next weekend never came. I sat in the kitchen with Maria, our housekeeper, who bought me a grocery store cupcake. I stuck 8 candles into it myself and made a wish I can't remember. Maybe I wished to be seen. Age 14. The California State Science Fair. My water filtration project beat 200 entries. The judges said I had a future in environmental engineering. I called my parents, breathless. That's wonderful, my father said. We'll celebrate at dinner. Dinner never happened. Blair had a Disney audition she didn't get. They spent the evening consoling her while I heated leftover pizza and hung my ribbon where only I would see it. Age 17. UC Irvine accepted me with a partial scholarship. I dreamed of dorm life and freedom. My father sat me down in his office and explained commuting would save money. Within a week, the truth was clear: someone needed to run the household, and that someone was me. By 18, I was managing a family of 4 like a corporate department. I balanced the budget because Dad wasn't good with numbers. I managed Mom's charity calendar because she couldn't keep track. I wrote Blair's college essays because she wasn't good with words. I scheduled, organized, mediated, and executed while finishing my degree and working part-time. I believed that if I worked hard enough, fixed enough problems, made myself indispensable, they'd finally see me. Not as Nora the fixer, but Nora the daughter. But here I was at 26, standing in a bedroom with pale blue walls my mother chose when I was 7, watching my wedding vanish. Finally understanding the truth, I wasn't the one who needed them. They needed me. And the moment I tried to leave, they made sure I couldn't. There was something else, too. A debt hanging over me since I was 8. A summer afternoon by the pool that neither my parents nor Blair ever let me forget. I didn't want to revisit it, but it was always there like a weight tied to my ankle. "You owe us," my mother's voice echoed. "After what happened, you owe this family everything." Blair's text arrived 30 minutes after Mom's. "Sis, I'm so sorry. I can't breathe. Everything's spinning. I need Mom and Dad. I need you to understand. Please don't hate me. Please reschedule. I can't lose you." B. I stared at it for 5 minutes before setting the phone down without replying. I didn't hate her. That would be a lie. I understood another lie. I forgave her for this the night before my wedding, the biggest lie of all. Because deep down beneath the numbness, I knew. The timing was too perfect. The emergency too convenient. Blair had been watching me for weeks with an unreadable expression whenever I mentioned the wedding. And less than 12 hours before I was supposed to marry Trenton and move into a life that didn't revolve around managing their chaos, she collapsed. Across the street, Christmas lights blinked red and green in mid-March, cheerful and out of season. I felt like those lights stuck in a moment everyone else had moved past. My wedding dress hung in the closet. White silk, simple and elegant, bought with my own money because my parents' wedding contribution had gone toward a $3,000 camera for Blair's content career. She'd used it twice. Now it gathered dust. The dress would do the same. I thought of Trenton in his Newport Beach apartment lying awake after our call. He'd been understanding. He was always understanding. But I'd heard the question he wouldn't ask. When will your family stop controlling your life? The answer was never. Not unless I made it stop. I looked around my bedroom, the art chosen by my mother, the throw pillows from her favorite store, the self-help books she'd given me about balance and stress, as if my stress wasn't caused by managing her life. It wasn't a bedroom. It was a hotel room I'd occupied for 26 years without ever checking in. That was the moment the daughter they knew died. I felt it like tectonic plates shifting. Something cracked open in my chest. I couldn't go back to who I'd been. Not after watching my wedding disappear because my sister needed attention and my parents needed me small, manageable, forever indebted. I crossed the room and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. I created a new document and typed, "To the Prescott family." I paused. This was the moment I chose myself over their dysfunction. The moment I stopped being useful and started being free. If this wedding wasn't happening, neither was my old life. It was time to resign from a position I'd never applied for the role of daughter-sister and permanent support system for people who had never once supported me back. I stood up from the bed an hour past midnight and pulled my old suitcase out from the back of the closet. I became responsible for Blair's life at 8 years old, not by choice, but by accident, and my family made sure I was never allowed to forget it. The guilt started the summer of 2004. My parents had gone to a charity gala at the Balboa Bay Club, leaving me in charge of Blair, who was 4. "You're 8 now," my mother said. "You're old enough to be responsible. Maria will be here if you need anything, but you're in charge of your sister." Maria was our housekeeper, a quiet woman who spent most of her time in the laundry room. I was sitting at the kitchen table doing math homework when I heard the splash. Blair was in the pool in the deep end, her blonde hair floating around her face, her arms flailing. She'd climbed over the decorative fence my mother insisted on. I didn't think. I just jumped in, still wearing my clothes and sneakers, and dragged her to the shallow end. Maria came running with a phone shouting in Spanish and called 911. Blair stayed in the hospital for 3 days while doctors checked her lungs and brain for damage. One doctor told my parents another 2 minutes and she would have had permanent brain damage or died. I thought they'd thank me. Instead, my mother grabbed my shoulders in the hallway and screamed, What were you thinking? You almost killed her." My father stood behind her and said, "We trusted you to take care of her, Nora." Not thank you, not you saved her, just blame. And 8-year-old me decided it must have been my fault. For 18 years, my family weaponized that moment. When I was 10 and wanted to join the soccer team, my mother said, "Who's going to watch Blair?" When I was 13 and asked to sleep over at Lindsay's house, my father said, "Remember what happened the last time we left you in charge?" When I was 16 and got a job offer at Starbucks, my mother cried and said Blair needed me at home. When I was 21 and tried to move into an apartment, my mother called every night for 2 weeks, sobbing, reminding me that Blair had almost died because of me. When I started dating Trenton at 24, my father said, "Are you really going to leave your sister behind again?" Blair learned from them. When she was 12 and I was 16, she asked to borrow $50 and said, "You almost let me die. You can't give me $50. When she was 20 and I was 24, she needed $500 for her credit card and told me, "You owe me my life. $500 is nothing." Over 14 years, Blair had borrowed approximately $45,000 from me. I kept track in a notebook hidden in my desk, each amount and date in blue ink. She never paid any of it back. The money came from 2 places. My family knew about my administrative assistant job, which paid $42,000 a year. What they didn't know was my second job, a freelance bookkeeping business I'd built online, earning between $2,500 and $3,500 a month, roughly $36,000 a year. I kept the money in a separate account at a credit union and did all the work on a laptop I kept locked in my room. My total income was $78,000 a year, but my family thought I barely scraped by. The $12,000 I'd saved for my wedding should have been $57,000. That's how much I would have had if Blair hadn't bled me dry, if I hadn't spent 18 years handing over my money because I was too guilty to say no. But now, standing in my room with my suitcase open, I finally understood. I hadn't almost killed her. I'd saved her. I jumped into that pool at 8 years old and pulled her out, and instead of gratitude, I'd gotten a lifetime of guilt. I wasn't their daughter. I was a system. I paid the bills, scheduled the appointments, managed the household. I'd been doing it since I was 14 when my mother handed me the checkbook and said, "You're better with numbers." By 18, I was writing Blair's college essays. By 22, I was managing my father's investor meetings. I was the invisible engine that kept the Prescott family moving, and the only payment I ever received was more work and more guilt. I zipped the suitcase shut and set it by the door. I'd rented a storage unit 6 months ago, the one my family didn't know existed, already planning this escape. But before I could leave for good, there was one more call I had to make to the man whose wedding I just canceled, the man who deserved to know why. At midnight on March 18th, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at Trenton Pierce's name on my phone. Trenton Pierce picked up on the first ring, and I could hear the hope in his voice, the hope I was about to extinguish. "Nora, what's going on? Your mom texted me too. Is Blair okay? Are we okay?" I closed my eyes and pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "She's in the emergency room. Panic attack. They need me there." "Then I'll come with you. We're getting married in 11 hours. "Trenton." I hesitated, my throat closing around the words. "I don't think we can do the ceremony tomorrow." Silence. Then carefully, "What do you mean? Every time I try to build something for myself, my family falls apart. Or maybe they make sure it falls apart." "What are you saying?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway where the catering van had disappeared an hour ago. "There's something that happened when we were kids. Blair almost died. It was an accident, but my parents have always blamed me for it. I've been paying for it ever since." "Nora, you were just a child. Whatever happened, I know, but they don't see it that way. And I spent 18 years believing them." My voice cracked, and I forced myself to keep talking. I jumped into a pool when I was 8 years old and pulled her out, and instead of thanking me, they told me it was my fault she was in there in the first place. They've been holding that over my head my entire life. Every time I wanted something for myself, soccer team sleepovers, college, a job, moving out, they reminded me that I almost killed my sister, that I owed them, that I owed her. Trenton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Why didn't you tell me this before because I didn't understand it myself until tonight. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I just did everything right, maybe they'd finally see me. But they won't. They can't. I'm not their daughter. I'm their unpaid assistant, their guilt-ridden servant, I stopped swallowing hard. I can't marry you until I figure out who I am without them. So, you want to postpone the wedding? For how long? I don't know. I need to move out of my parents' house. I need to find out who I am when I'm not carrying this guilt around. When I'm not being told every day that I owe someone my life because I saved theirs. Postpone, he repeated, and I could hear him processing, trying to find solid ground. So what? Breaking up? I love you, I said, and the tears finally came hot and fast down my cheeks. But I can't marry you until I'm free, until I know I'm choosing you, not just running away from them. Nora, listen to me. His voice was firm now, almost desperate. I'll wait for you, however long it takes. Please don't. You deserve someone who's whole. I want you, broken whole, whatever. We can get through this together. I have to do this alone. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet without my family and without using you as a life raft. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I've spent my entire life being responsible for other people. I need to be responsible for myself first. So that's it. You're just done. I'm not done with you. I'm done with them. I took a shaky breath. I'm going to stay with Lindsay for a while. I've already rented a storage unit for my things. I'm leaving tomorrow morning before they get back from the hospital. Jesus, Nora, you've been planning this for 6 months. I didn't know it would happen like this. I didn't know Blair would. I stopped myself. I didn't know what Blair had done yet. I didn't know about the text messages she'd sent Trenton from a fake number, the messages designed to make him think I was still in love with my ex-boyfriend, that I was only marrying him for his money. I didn't know that she'd orchestrated this entire emergency to make sure the wedding never happened. I only knew that my family had a pattern of destroying the things I loved, and I couldn't let them destroy this too, even if it meant walking away from the man I wanted to spend my life with. Nora, I need you to hear me. Trenton's voice was steady, now controlled. I'm not going anywhere. When you're ready, when you've figured out who you are and what you want, I'll be here. I'll wait as long as it takes. Don't wait for me. You deserve better than someone who can't even show up to her own wedding. I deserve you, and you deserve to be free. So go. Do what you need to do. But don't tell me not to love you because I'm not going to stop. I pressed my hand against my mouth to muffle the sob that escaped. I have to go. Nora, I'll call you when I'm ready, when I'm myself again. I love you. I love you too. That's why I have to let you go. I ended the call before he could respond, before I could change my mind, before the hope in his voice could pull me back into the life I was trying to escape. The phone screen went dark in my hand, and I sat in the silence of my childhood bedroom, listening to the sound of my own breathing. This was the first time I had ever chosen myself first. The first time I'd said no to the guilt, no to the obligation, no to the expectation that I would sacrifice my own happiness to keep everyone else comfortable. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. I packed the last of my clothes into the suitcase, jeans, sweaters, the few things I actually cared about, and looked around the room where I'd lived for 26 years. The bookshelf I'd built in high school, the desk where I'd done Blair's homework, the closet where I'd hidden my savings and my secrets. By morning, all of this would be gone. I'd load my car and drive to Lindsay's apartment in Costa Mesa, and I'd start the process of becoming someone new, someone who didn't owe anyone anything. But first, I had to survive one more night in this house. Morning came at 7 o'clock on March 18th in a hotel room that should have been my bridal suite. Morning came with the kind of silence that felt suffocating, the champagne chilling in the ice bucket, the white silk robe hanging on the bathroom door, and my wedding day dying before it could begin. Lindsay was sitting on the edge of the other bed, already dressed, her phone in her hand. She looked up when I stirred. "How are you feeling?" "Like I have to cancel everything," I said. I sat up and reached for my phone. 7 missed calls from my mother, 12 texts from various aunts and cousins, and 1 message from Trenton that simply said, "I need to see you, please. I have something to tell you." I ignored all of them except his and started making the calls I'd been dreading since midnight. The first was to Beringer Vineyards. The woman who answered was polite but firm. "I'm so sorry to hear about your family emergency, but per the contract, the $18,000 deposit is non-refundable. The ceremony was scheduled for 11:30 this morning." I thanked her and hung up. The second call was to Lisa Romano, the catering manager. She was kinder. "Nora, I'm so sorry. I'll do what I can, but the contract stipulates that cancellations within 48 hours forfeit the deposit. That's $8,500. I told her I understood. I didn't even care about the money anymore. What was $8,500 compared to 18 years of my life? By 9 o'clock, I'd composed a mass text to the 120 guests. "Due to unforeseen family circumstances, today's wedding will be postponed indefinitely. We apologize for the inconvenience and any travel arrangements you've already made." I hit send and watched my phone explode with concerned replies. I turned it face down on the nightstand. Lindsay handed me a cup of coffee. "You okay?" "No, but I will be." I picked up the phone again and opened Trenton's message. "I need to see you, please. I have something to tell you." I texted back, "Starbucks on Pacific Coast Highway, 10:30. Trenton was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 untouched coffees in front of him. He looked terrible dark circles under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed. He stood when he saw me, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. "Nora," his voice cracked. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him and folded my hands on the table. "What do you need to tell me?" He took a breath and slid his phone across the table. "Last night, before your mom's text, I got an email, an anonymous one. Someone sent me screenshots of text messages that were supposedly from you." I stared at the screen. The messages were formatted to look like they'd come from my number, sent to someone named Reed, my ex-boyfriend, the one I'd broken up with 2 years ago when I'd realized I wanted something more stable, someone who didn't make me feel like I was constantly auditioning for his approval. The messages said things like, "I still think about us. Trenton is stable, but you understand me better. And I'm marrying him for security. But I miss what we had." I looked up at Trenton, my stomach twisting. I never sent these. "Trenton, I haven't talked to Reed in 2 years. I know." He ran a hand through his hair. "I called him at 2 in the morning. He confirmed you two barely speak. He said someone was trying to sabotage us." "And you believed these messages even for a second? For a few hours, yes." His voice was raw. They looked so real. The format, the wording, everything. But by morning, I knew. I knew they were fake. But the damage was already done. I pushed the phone back toward him. "You doubted me." "I'm sorry. I was scared. I thought maybe you were having second thoughts. Maybe you were only marrying me to get away from your family, and maybe part of you still—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter. I was wrong, and I should have trusted you." I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. The email came at 10:32 last night. Yes. And my mom's text about Blair came at 11:47. Lindsay, who'd been standing a few feet away giving us space, stepped closer. "You think they're connected?" I looked at her, then back at Trenton. "Blair's emergency happened the same night someone sent fake messages to my fiancé. That's not a coincidence. That's coordination." Trenton leaned forward. "You think your sister did this? I know she did." My voice was cold steady. She couldn't let me leave, so she destroyed my exit. I thought about the email, the screenshots, the timing. Blair had always been tech-savvy. She ran her own social media accounts, edited her own videos, knew how to manipulate images and text. She'd have known how to fake a text conversation, how to make it look real enough to plant doubt. And she'd have known exactly when to trigger the emergency, to maximize the chaos, to make sure the wedding couldn't go forward, to make sure I stayed trapped in that house under the weight of guilt and obligation. "What are you going to do?" Trenton asked quietly. I stood up. "I'm going to confront them. Right now." "I'm coming with you." "No." I met his eyes. "I have to do this alone. Nora, This is my family, my fight. I need to face them by myself. He stood and took my hand. Then call me when it's over. Promise me. I nodded, squeezed his hand once, and walked out of the Starbucks into the bright California morning. The drive to 2,450 Pelican Crest Drive took 20 minutes, and with every mile I felt the anger harden into something sharp and cold. This wasn't just about a canceled wedding anymore. This wasn't just about 18 years of guilt and servitude. This was about Blair deliberately calculatingly destroying the one chance I'd had to escape, and my parents enabling her, because it was easier than holding her accountable. I parked in the circular driveway and stared at the house where I'd jumped into a pool at 8 years old to save my sister's life. The house where I'd been told every day since then that I owed them the house where I'd given up my college education and my freedom and $12,000 and 18 years of my life. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My hands weren't shaking. My voice wasn't trembling. I was done being the guilty one, the responsible one, the invisible one. I drove to 2,450 Pelican Crest Drive for what I swore would be the last time. This wasn't just about a canceled wedding anymore. This was war. The house looked the same, pristine, expensive hollow, but for the first time I saw it for what it really was, a prison I'd helped build. I walked through the front door at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the exact hour I should have been standing under an arbor in Napa Valley saying my vows. Instead, I was standing in the marble foyer of my childhood home, staring at my family eating a late lunch, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just destroyed my wedding and my future in a single coordinated attack. My mother looked up from her salad and smiled that same bright, empty smile she always wore. "Oh, sweetheart, you're here. We were so worried. Are you okay?" Blair was sprawled on the living room couch, scrolling through her phone, her legs tucked under her like a child. She glanced up at me and shrugged. "Yeah, sorry about your wedding. But you understand, right?" "No," I said. "I don't understand." My father set down his fork and leaned back in his chair at the kitchen table, watching me with the detached curiosity of someone observing an experiment. He didn't say anything. He never did when things got difficult. That was my mother's job. I walked to the table and set my phone down hard enough that it made a sharp crack against the marble. Someone sent fake text messages to my fiancé last night. Messages claiming I was still in love with my ex-boyfriend and only marrying Trenton for his money. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "What? That's terrible!" I didn't take my eyes off Blair. The email was sent at 10:32 last night, from this house's IP address. And then, an hour later, Blair had a very convenient emergency. Blair sat up, her face shifting from bored to defensive in an instant. "Are you accusing me I was in the hospital? Were you—" I kept my voice calm, cold. "Because I'm going to subpoena the records from Hoag Hospital, and if you weren't admitted, that's fraud. Nora, you're being paranoid." My mother started, but I cut her off. "The timing is too perfect. You sabotaged my wedding because you can't function without me. You can't pay your bills. You can't manage your schedules. You can't keep this house running. And the thought of me leaving terrified you so much that you decided to blow up my entire life to keep me here." Blair stood up, her voice rising. "After everything you've done, after you almost killed me," and there it was, the weapon they'd been using for 18 years pulled out one more time. "I saved your life." The words exploded out of me louder than I'd meant them to be. I was 8 years old. For the first time in 18 years, I was saying it out loud. I was refusing the guilt they'd built my entire existence around. I turned to my parents. "You left an 8-year-old in charge of a 4-year-old next to a swimming pool. When she almost drowned, you blamed me instead of yourselves. You blamed a child for your failure as parents." My mother's face went white. "You were responsible." "No, you were responsible, and you used that guilt to control me for 18 years. Blair's voice was venomous now, all pretense of innocence gone. "So what you owe me? You owe this family. I've repaid that debt 1,000 times over." My voice was steady, clear. "I saved your life. Then I spent 18 years managing yours. I'm done." I looked at each of them in turn, my father sitting silent and useless, my mother with her hand still pressed to her chest in fake shock, Blair standing in the middle of the living room with her arms crossed, defiant and unrepentant. I'm moving out. Today. And I'm taking every password, every system, every ounce of free labor I've given you with me. My father finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. You're being dramatic. You'll be back. Watch me. I turned and walked upstairs to my room for the last time. The suitcase I'd packed the night before was still by the door. I grabbed the few remaining things, my laptop, my notebooks, the framed photo of Lindsay and me at graduation, and shoved them into a duffel bag. Downstairs, I could hear my mother's voice rising, arguing with Blair, and my father saying something I couldn't make out. I walked back down the stairs and into the kitchen. I took out a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone, the same notepad where I'd written grocery lists and appointment reminders and to-do lists for the past 12 years, and I wrote one final message. I resign from the position of daughter, sister, housekeeper, and scapegoat. You blamed an 8-year-old child for your own failures. You weaponized my guilt for 18 years. I don't owe you my life. I've given enough. Nora. I left the note on the kitchen table, picked up my bags, and walked to the front door. My mother called after me, her voice frantic. Nora, you can't just leave. We're your family. You were never my family, I said without turning around. I was your employee and I quit. I opened the door and stepped outside. My father appeared in the doorway behind me, his face red. You'll be back. You can't survive without us. I stopped at my car, threw my bags in the back seat, and turned to face him one last time. No, I said. You can't survive without me. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away from 2450 Pelican Crest Drive without looking back. In my rearview mirror, I could see my father standing in the driveway, my mother next to him, and Blair in the doorway behind them. They looked small and powerless, and for the first time in my life, I felt bigger than they were. I drove to an address I'd kept secret for 6 months, 945 Alton Parkway Unit 214 Irvine, my studio apartment. The one I'd rented last September with the first paycheck from my freelance business. The one I'd furnished slowly with secondhand furniture and thrift store finds. The one no one in my family knew existed. My escape hatch. My freedom. I parked in the small lot, climbed the stairs to the second floor, and unlocked the door. The apartment was tiny, just a single room with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish, every towel had been chosen by me, paid for by me, and belonged to no one else. For the first time in my life, I was alone, and I'd never felt lighter. They gave me 7 days of silence, 7 days to believe they'd accepted my leaving. I should have known better. The first 3 days were the quietest I'd ever known. I unpacked my suitcase in the studio apartment at 945 Alton Parkway, arranging my secondhand furniture piece by piece until the small space felt like mine. I hung curtains I'd bought from Target, stocked the tiny kitchenette with groceries I'd chosen myself, and set up my laptop on the folding desk by the window where the afternoon light came in warm and golden. Lindsay came over on day 2 with a housewarming gift, a potted succulent, and a bottle of cheap champagne, and we sat cross-legged on the floor, toasting to freedom. To never answering their calls again, she said, and we clinked our plastic cups together and laughed until our sides hurt. I worked my freelance bookkeeping jobs during those first days, answering emails from small business owners who paid me on time and appreciated my work. I made my own meals, chose my own bedtime, and woke up without the sound of my mother's voice calling my name or Blair's demands echoing through the house. For the first time in 18 years, I could breathe without permission. I kept my phone on, though. I was waiting for the retaliation, the angry texts, the threats that I knew were coming. But nothing came. No calls, no messages, no acknowledgement that I'd even left. I told myself they were waiting for me to come crawling back the way I always had before, when I'd threatened to leave. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't bluffing. On day 4, the cracks started to show. Graham called 3 times in the span of an hour. I didn't answer. The first voicemail was curt, irritated, the voice of a man who expected instant compliance. Nora, the Wi-Fi isn't working. What's the password? Call me back. I'd changed the password before I left, reset the router to factory settings, and taken the login information with me. He didn't know the internet provider was Spectrum. He didn't know the account number. He didn't know how to navigate an automated customer service line. And without Wi-Fi, Blair's Instagram live streams, the foundation of her influencer income went dark. Her followers started asking questions. Her engagement dropped. Her carefully curated online empire began to crumble because no one in that house knew how to reset a router. Day 5 brought Blair's meltdown. She was supposed to fly to Miami for a brand trip, one of those all-expenses-paid excursions where influencers stayed in beachfront hotels and posted glossy photos in exchange for exposure and a few $1,000s in collaboration fees. I used to book her flights weeks in advance, print her boarding passes, set up Uber pickups to the airport, and send calendar reminders the night before with gate numbers and departure times. Without me, she drove to the wrong terminal at John Wayne Airport, arrived 3 hours too early, then somehow missed her flight anyway. The brand partnership, worth $8,000 and a week of free luxury, evaporated. Her second voicemail was a scream, raw and unhinged. "You sabotaged me. That deal is gone. I'm going to sue you. You owe me, Nora." I listened to it sitting at my folding desk with a mug of coffee, and I smiled. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I just stopped doing her job for her. Day 6 was my father's investor disaster. Graham had a dinner meeting scheduled with a potential angel investor, a man named Richard, who was considering putting $40 million into my father's luxury real estate development firm. It was the kind of deal that could transform the company, the kind my father had been chasing for 2 years. I used to manage his calendar, sync it across all his devices, send him text reminders 2 hours before every meeting, and prepare one-page briefing documents with the investor's background, interests, and talking points. Without me, the calendar alert never went off. My father sat at home in his study, unaware, while Richard waited at Fleming's Steakhouse in Newport Beach, checking his watch and growing colder by the minute. After 45 minutes, Richard left. The deal died before it began. My father's third voicemail was frantic, barely controlled rage. "Where the hell were you? Do you have any idea what you just cost me? Call me back." I deleted it without finishing. By day 7, the desperation had turned to venom. My mother left the longest voicemail, her voice dripping with the particular brand of manipulation she'd perfected over decades. "Nora, this is ridiculous. The house is falling apart. You're being incredibly selfish. Your father is a mess. Blair is losing opportunities, and you're sitting somewhere feeling sorry for yourself. Come home and fix this. We're your family. Not we miss you. Not we were wrong. Just come home and fix this, as if I were a malfunctioning appliance that needed to be returned to service." I listened to all 47 calls and 23 voicemails over the course of that week, sitting alone in my studio apartment as the sun set over Irvine and the city lights began to glow. I listened to my father's frustration, my mother's manipulation, my sister's rage, and with each message, something inside me shifted and settled into place. They didn't miss me. They missed my service. They missed the unpaid labor, the invisible management, the systems I'd built and maintained, while they took all the credit. I wasn't their daughter. I was infrastructure. And infrastructure, once removed, reveals exactly how fragile everything built on top of it really is. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. On the evening of day 7, I opened my phone settings and blocked my parents' numbers. The decision was calm, final, undramatic. I simply pressed the buttons and watched their names disappear from my call log. I kept Blair's number unblocked, not because I wanted to hear from her, but because I needed to monitor her. I needed to see what she'd do next, how desperate she'd become, whether she'd escalate. I knew my sister. I knew that when she felt cornered, she got dangerous. The voicemails stopped after day 7, and that silence was more dangerous than the noise. Because I knew my family, and when they went quiet, it meant they were planning something. While they were drowning in the chaos I'd left behind, I was learning how to swim, and for the first time, I was swimming towards something not just away. April through November of 2023 passed in a blur of library study sessions, freelance invoices, and therapy appointments. I finished my final semester at UC Irvine, juggling online lectures with my administrative assistant job and the bookkeeping clients I'd built up over the years. I made $3,000 a month from freelance work and $3,500 from my day job, and for the first time in my life, every dollar I earned stayed mine. No one borrowed it. No one guilted me into handing it over. I paid my rent, bought my groceries, and watched my savings account grow. In November, I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in business administration. My parents weren't there. I hadn't invited them. Lindsay sat in the third row of the Bren Events Center, cheering when my name was called, and Mrs. Helen Crawford, my high school English teacher who'd written one of my college recommendation letters, drove down from Pasadena to watch me walk across the stage. Mr. Paul Brennan from the UC Irvine Career Center was there too, the man who'd helped me tailor my resume and practice interview answers until I could recite my strengths without flinching. The people who mattered were there. The people who'd failed me weren't. And for the first time, I understood that absence could be a gift. 1 month later, I was hired as an operations manager at CloudSync Solutions, a SaaS startup in Irvine that built project management software for remote teams. The salary was $95,000 a year, more money than I'd ever imagined, making more than my father had ever acknowledged I was capable of earning. I had my own office on the third floor of a building on Michelson Drive, a desk with 2 monitors and a team of 12 people who reported to me. My colleague Morgan Ellis, the product manager, took me to lunch on my first day and told me, "You're going to crush this job." And I believed her. But the real work wasn't happening in classrooms or conference rooms. It was happening every Thursday at 4 o'clock in Dr. Alan Foster's office on Main Street in Irvine, where I sat on a gray couch and untangled 18 years of guilt and trauma. Dr. Foster was in his late 40s, patient and methodical, and he had a gift for asking questions I didn't want to answer. "Tell me about the pool incident," he'd said in our third session, and I'd spend an hour crying into a box of tissues while he took notes and nodded. "You were parentified," he told me in July during the session that cracked something open inside me. "Your parents gave you responsibilities no child should carry, and then they blamed you when those responsibilities became too heavy. That's not love, Nora. That's abuse." I'd sat with that word for weeks, abuse turning it over in my mind, testing its weight. I'd always thought abuse meant yelling or hitting something loud and visible. I hadn't understood that it could be quiet, insidious, a slow erosion of boundaries until you didn't know where you ended and your family's needs began. But Dr. Foster was right. I'd been 8 years old and they'd failed me, not the other way around. By the fall, I'd started to rebuild a social life. I met Lindsay for coffee at Hidden House every Sunday morning, the two of us sitting by the window and talking about everything and nothing. I joined a book club and met Emma Price, a graphic designer who lived in Costa Mesa and would later become my neighbor. Morgan and I went hiking on weekends, climbing the trails at Crystal Cove and Laguna Coast, and I learned what it felt like to have friends who didn't ask me for anything except my company. I kept tabs on my family from a distance the way you'd monitor a storm on the horizon. I heard through Newport Beach social circles that they'd sold the Park City vacation condo in August for $1.15 million. In October, my father's Porsche 911 appeared on a luxury consignment website. In December, Lindsay forwarded me a screenshot from an industry group chat. Blair had been blacklisted by 2 major management agencies for being unprofessional and impossible to work with. I read the news with a kind of detached curiosity, the way you'd read about strangers struggling in a place you used to live. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindication. I felt nothing, and that nothingness felt like freedom. I thought about Trenton every day. I checked his LinkedIn profile more often than I wanted to admit, watched him get promoted to senior investment banker at Morgan Stanley, saw him relocate to San Francisco. Lindsay asked me once over lattes at Hidden House, "Do you ever think about calling him?" "Every day," I said. "But I need to be whole first. I can't build a relationship from guilt or need, only from choice." She'd squeezed my hand across the table and said, "He'd wait for you, you know." "I know," I said, "but I need to wait for myself first." By February of 2024, I'd saved $15,000. My credit score, which I checked obsessively every month, had climbed to 720. I was stable solvent and ready for something more than a 400-square-foot studio with a Murphy bed. I found a listing for Soco Lofts in Costa Mesa, a luxury apartment complex on Highland Avenue with floor-to-ceiling windows, in-unit washers and dryers, and a rooftop pool. The one-bedroom units rented for $3,200 a month, and I could afford it. Not comfortably, but I could do it. This wasn't just an apartment. It was proof that I'd made it. I filled out the application online, uploaded my pay stubs and bank statements, and hit submit with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I had income. I had credit history. I had a stable life. 2 days later, Brenda Walsh from the leasing office called. Her voice had that careful, uncomfortable tone people use when delivering bad news. "Ms. Prescott, Tom," she said, "we need to talk about your rental application." Brenda Walsh turned her computer screen away from me, and in that instant, I knew my family had found a new way to destroy me. We were sitting in the leasing office at SoCo Lofts that afternoon 3 days after her call, and Brenda looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. She was in her mid-30s, professional and kind, and I could see the discomfort written all over her face as she pulled up my credit report. "Ms. Prescott," she said carefully, "there's an issue with your credit check." I leaned forward. "An issue?" My credit score was 720 last year. She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me for just a second before angling it away again, as if she didn't want me to see the full damage. "It's 510 now. And there's a significant amount of unpaid debt." My stomach dropped. "How much?" She said it quietly, almost apologetically. $385,000. I sat perfectly still. "That's not possible." "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish I could approve you, but with this kind of red flag, corporate policy won't allow it." I walked out of the office in a fog, climbed into my car in the parking lot, and sat behind the wheel with my hands shaking. I opened my laptop, connected to my phone's hotspot, and went straight to annualcreditreport.com. I entered my information name, social security number, date of birth, the address I'd lived at for 11 months, and waited for the page to load. When it did, I stopped breathing. There were 6 accounts I'd never opened, 6 massive debts I'd never authorized. American Express Platinum, opened April 2023, balance $45,000. Chase Sapphire Reserve, opened May 2023, balance $38,000. City Prestige opened July 2023, balance $52,000. Marcus by Goldman Sachs, personal loan opened August 2023, balance $95,000. Lending Club personal loan opened November 2023, balance $85,000. Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon lease opened January 2024, balance $70,000 over 3 years. Total $385,000. I scrolled through the transaction histories, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Luxury hotels, designer boutiques, high-end restaurants, spa treatments, private flights. Every charge was extravagant, reckless, and none of it was mine. I opened Instagram on my phone, not my real account, but the fake one I'd created months ago to monitor my family from a distance. I pulled up Blair's profile. She posted constantly documenting every aspect of her life in glossy, curated images. And as I scrolled, the pieces started to fall into place. September 2023. A photo of Blair at Esperanza Resort in Cabo San Lucas, champagne glass in hand, sunset in the background. Caption, "Living my best life." I cross-referenced the date with my credit report. There it was, an $820 charge to Esperanza Resort Cabo San Lucas on the same day. December 2023, Blair at the Faena Hotel in Miami South Beach, posing by the pool in a designer bikini. My credit report showed a $6,500 charge to Faena Hotel Miami on the same date. February 2024, a spa retreat in Scottsdale, Arizona. Blair's post showed her in a white robe with cucumber slices on her eyes. My credit report, $4,800 charged to a luxury spa in Scottsdale same weekend. March 2024, a photo of Blair standing next to a gleaming black Mercedes G-Wagon with a red bow on top. Caption, "New ride, who dis?" My credit report, Mercedes-Benz lease opened January 2024, $15,000 upfront payment. Every single post matched a charge on my stolen accounts. Every vacation, every designer handbag, every luxury experience Blair had been flaunting for the past year had been funded by my identity, my credit, my future. I sat in the car staring at the screen and felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a desperate mistake. This was calculated. I scrolled back further in the credit report past the accounts opened after I'd left and found something that made my blood run cold. August 2022. The first fraudulent account had been opened 7 months before my wedding. 7 months before Blair sabotaged my marriage. 7 months before the fake text messages and the emergency room hoax. She'd been planning this long before I'd ever left. She'd opened the first account while I was still living in that house, still managing their lives, still trapped in the cycle of guilt and obligation. She'd been setting up an escape hatch for herself, a way to keep living the life I'd been funding, even if I finally got away. I pulled the small notebook out of my purse, the one I'd kept hidden for years, tracking every dollar Blair had borrowed from me. $45,000 over 14 years. I'd recorded every request, every guilt trip, every time she'd invoked the pool incident to justify taking my money. And now I understood. She hadn't just been bleeding me dry with guilt. She'd been conditioning me, training me to accept that my resources belonged to her. And when I finally broke free, she'd simply shifted to a new strategy. She'd stolen my identity because she believed she was entitled to it, because she'd been taught that I owed her everything, including my name, my credit, and my future. The accounts had all been opened from the same address, 2450 Pelican Crest Drive. The billing address had been changed to a P.O. box in Newport Beach. I'd never seen a single statement. I'd never received a single notification. Blair had rerouted everything hidden, everything, and spent a year living off my stolen credit while I was building a new life. I looked at the credit report one more time at the dates and the amounts and the trail of destruction my sister had left in my name. And I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead made me feel strangely calm. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a federal crime. I picked up my phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Blair. I didn't even think about giving them a chance to explain. I called Lindsay. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, what's up? I need the best fraud attorney you know," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And I need to see them today." Sharon Griffin's office had floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking Fashion Island, and her handshake was firm enough to hurt exactly what I needed. Lindsay had helped me find her a fraud attorney with 20 years of experience and a reputation for taking down white-collar criminals who thought they were untouchable. Her office was on the top floor of a sleek building at 1250 Fashion Island Boulevard in Newport Beach, and when I walked in at 10 o'clock on the morning of March 5th, she was already waiting for me with my credit report spread across her mahogany desk. The receptionist had offered me coffee, but my hands were already shaking too much to hold a cup. "Ms. Prescott," Sharon said, gesturing to the leather chair across from her. "Thank you for sending the documents ahead of time. I've reviewed everything, and I want to be clear with you. From the start, this is textbook identity theft. Federal jurisdiction. Your sister could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison." "Good," I said. Sharon didn't flinch. She just leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp and calculating. "You understand this will destroy your family publicly. Once we file criminal charges, it becomes a matter of public record. Reporters may pick it up. Your parents' names will be in the court documents. Your sister will be arrested. There's no going back from this. They already destroyed themselves," I said. "I'm just documenting it." She nodded slowly, a hint of approval crossing her face, then pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped a fountain pen. "Here's how this works. We're going to file a criminal complaint and a civil lawsuit. The criminal case seeks justice. It puts your sister in prison and establishes that a crime was committed. The civil case seeks compensation. It forces them to repay the money and compensate you for the damage to your credit, your emotional distress, and your financial losses. The process will take at least 4 to 6 months, possibly longer if they fight it. First, we file a police report with the Newport Beach Police Department. Then the FBI investigates because this crosses state lines and involves federal banking laws. Then a grand jury decides whether to indict. Then we go to trial." "What are the chances she'll actually go to prison?" I asked. "With this amount of evidence, very high. Identity theft of this magnitude, especially by a family member, carries serious penalties. Juries hate this kind of betrayal. And if we can prove premeditation, which I believe we can given the timeline you've described, the sentence will be harsher." "How much will this cost?" I asked quietly. $15,000 retainer to start. That covers the initial filing, the investigation coordination, and the first 30 hours of work. After that, it's $450 an hour. I felt my stomach drop. $15,000 was everything I'd saved over the past year. Every dollar I'd earned from my job and my freelance work, every expense I'd cut, every sacrifice I'd made. But I looked at the credit report on Sharon's desk at the $385,000 my sister had stolen, at the 510 credit score that had destroyed my chance at the apartment I'd worked so hard to afford, and I knew I didn't have a choice. "I'll pay it," I said. Sharon slid a contract across the desk. "Sign here. We start immediately." The next afternoon, I sat in Martin Webb's office at 3200 Park Center Drive in Costa Mesa, a sparse, organized space that smelled like coffee and printer ink. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and a whiteboard behind his desk was covered in timelines and flowcharts from other cases. Martin was a forensic accountant in his 50s, methodical and brilliant, the kind of person who could reconstruct a financial crime from a single receipt. He wore reading glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and his desk was covered in neat stacks of spreadsheets. Sharon had recommended him, and within 10 minutes of looking at my credit report, he'd already found something I'd missed. "This P.O. box," he said, tapping the screen with the end of his pen. "Box number 4721. It was rented in February of 2023 at the Newport Beach Post Office. All your credit card statements were rerouted there. You never saw a single piece of mail, did you?" "No," I said. "Not one." "February." Martin repeated, making a note. "That's 1 month before your wedding was canceled. Whoever did this was planning ahead. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was premeditated fraud." "My sister had help," I said. "I'm sure of it. She's not smart enough to do this alone." Martin looked up at me over his reading glasses. "I'll look into that. In the meantime, I need to build a comprehensive timeline. Every transaction, every account, opening, every charge, every location. I'll subpoena bank records, pull surveillance footage from ATMs where withdrawals were made, trace the IP addresses where the credit applications were submitted. I'll cross-reference her social media posts with the transaction dates to prove she was the one spending the money. By the time we're done, we'll know every move she made." He handed me a printed list. "I need these from you, your phone records from the past 2 years proving you didn't make calls to these banks or credit card companies. Employment verification from CloudSync Solutions showing your actual income and proving you couldn't support this level of spending. And I need you to download your social media archives, Instagram, Facebook. Anything you have so we can show you were living modestly while she was posting luxury vacations funded by your stolen credit." I nodded, already making mental notes. "I have most of that. I can get it to you by tomorrow." "Good. Sharon will handle the subpoenas for email records and bank surveillance footage. We'll coordinate everything." He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Ms. Prescott, I've worked fraud cases for 30 years. This one is particularly egregious because of the family relationship. Juries don't like it when people steal from their own blood. You have a very strong case. I don't want revenge," I said. "I want justice." "You'll get both," Martin said. That evening, I sat alone in my studio apartment at 945 Alton Parkway, staring at my phone. I'd spent the day signing contracts, authorizing background checks, emptying my savings account into Sharon's trust account. I was officially at war with my family, and there was no turning back. My bank account balance was $700. I had enough to cover rent and groceries for 2 weeks, and then I'd be living paycheck to paycheck until the case was over. Lindsay had come over earlier with Thai takeout from the place down the street, and before she left, she'd sat next to me on my futon and said, "You should call him. He deserves to know what's happening." "It's been almost a year," I'd said. "What if he's moved on? What if he met someone else? Only one way to find out." Now sitting alone with the city lights glowing through my window, I opened my contacts and scrolled to his name. I'd never deleted it. I'd never even changed it. It still said T with a red heart next to it. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang once, twice. Then Trenton's voice, hoarse and immediate, "Nora." I closed my eyes and felt tears prick behind my eyelids. "Hi, I needed to tell you something. You were right. About my family, about everything." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, could imagine him standing somewhere in his San Francisco apartment, gripping his phone the way I was gripping mine. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice steady, now controlled. "I'm coming to you, right now." The coffee shop where we'd had our first date looked exactly the same, but the two people walking through that door were nothing like the ones who'd left. I arrived at Hidden House Coffee at 9:50 on the morning of March 7th, 10 minutes early, because I couldn't sit still in my apartment any longer. The place was tucked into a quiet corner on Irvine Avenue in Newport Beach, a small independent shop with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the smell of fresh ground beans hanging in the air. Lindsay and I came here every Sunday, and years ago Trenton and I had sat at the corner table by the window and talked for 4 hours straight on our first date. That felt like a lifetime ago now. I ordered a latte. I knew I wouldn't drink, my hands shaking as I handed the barista my card. She was the same woman who'd worked here for years, and she gave me a look of quiet sympathy as she slid the cup across the counter. I wondered if she remembered us, if she'd noticed when we'd stopped coming. I sat at a table near the back, facing the door, my laptop open in front of me with the credit report already pulled up on the screen. I checked my phone. 9:55. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened and Trenton walked in. He looked different. Older somehow, though it had only been 11 months. His hair was a little longer and he was wearing a dark blue sweater I'd never seen before. But his eyes were the same steady searching, and when they found mine across the room, we both froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the space between us in 6 long strides, and I stood up, and we just looked at each other. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I whispered, and my voice broke, and suddenly I was crying. "Hey." Trenton reached out like he wanted to touch me, then hesitated, his hand hovering in the air between us. "Can I?" I nodded, and he pulled me into a hug. I buried my face in his shoulder and felt 11 months of loneliness crack open all at once. He smelled like the same cologne he'd always worn, and his arms were solid and warm, and for the first time in a year, I felt safe. "I'm sorry," I said into his sweater. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "Don't apologize." We stood like that for a long moment, and then I pulled back and wiped my eyes, and we sat down across from each other at the small table. The barista brought Trenton a black coffee without him ordering, and he gave her a grateful nod. "You look different," he said. "Stronger." "I had to be." I took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry for pushing you away. I couldn't drag you into the mess I was trying to escape." "I know, and you needed space. I understood that. He stopped, his jaw tightening. "I missed you every single day. I missed you too." I opened my laptop and turned it toward him. "But you were right, about my family, about everything, and I need to show you what they did." He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the credit report on the screen. I watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to something cold and furious. $385,000. He looked up at me. "Nora, when did this happen?" The first account was opened in August of 2022, 2 months before we got engaged. His face went pale. Before the fake texts, before everything. I pulled up the timeline Martin had started building. Sabotaging our wedding was plan A. If we broke up, I'd stay at home and she could keep exploiting me. When I left anyway, plan B was already in motion. I opened Blair's Instagram on my phone and slid it across the table. Trenton scrolled through the posts, the Cabo Resort, the Miami Hotel, the Scottsdale Spa, the black Mercedes G-Wagon with the ridiculous bow. "These trips cost thousands," he said quietly. "All charged to credit cards opened in my name. She funded her fake influencer life by stealing mine." I pulled up the credit report transactions and showed him how the dates matched. Every vacation, every designer bag, every luxury hotel, it was all my stolen credit. "And your parents let her do this." His voice was flat controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. "I think they knew. The accounts were opened from their address. They had to have seen something." Trenton sat back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair. "I should have fought harder for you that night. I should have known those texts were fake immediately. You called Reed at 2 a.m. You investigated. You tried. But I doubted you, even for a few hours." I reached across the table and touched his hand. And I left you without a real explanation. We both did the best we could with the information we had. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine. Let me help you now. I have resources, connections, money if you need it for legal fees. I don't want your money, I said gently. I can pay for this. Then let me just be here. Let me be part of this fight. I hesitated. I'm not asking you to wait for me anymore, Trenton. That's not fair. I'm not waiting. His grip on my hand tightened. I'm choosing. Every single day I choose you. I looked down at our joined hands at the way his thumb was brushing across my knuckles the way it used to. I don't know if we can go back to what we were. Then we move forward as something new, something stronger. Partners, I asked. He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him all morning. Partners. For now, and maybe more. When you're ready. When I'm ready. I repeated and felt something warm and tentative unfold in my chest. We finished our coffees and went over the evidence together. I showed him Sharon's legal strategy, Martin's forensic timeline, the PO. Box that had been rented a month before our wedding was canceled. Trenton asked sharp questions, took notes on his phone, and by the end of the hour, we had the beginning of a plan. Okay, I said as we stood to leave. Let's destroy them. Together, Trenton said. We left Hidden House Coffee with a plan: gather evidence, build the case, prosecute, and maybe, just maybe, find our way back to each other in the process. Martin Webb called after 3 weeks of investigation and said the 5 words that changed everything. We found her digital footprints. On April 5th, 2024, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I sat in Sharon Griffin's conference room at 1250, Fashion Island Boulevard in Newport Beach, Trenton, beside me, watching Martin Webb project an 82-page forensic report onto the wall-mounted screen. Sharon leaned forward with her legal pad pen poised. The late afternoon sun slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like tiny witnesses to the evidence about to unfold. Martin began without preamble. I've traced every transaction, every login, every email, and every search query. Blair Prescott didn't just steal your identity. Nora, she documented every single step of the process, and she was arrogant enough to think no one would ever look. He clicked to the first slide, and my breath caught in my throat. On the screen was a file icon labeled fake_texts, _Nora, _read.psd, timestamped March 17th, 2023 at 9:15 in the evening. This Photoshop file, Martin explained, was created on Blair's MacBook Pro 2 hours before the anonymous email was sent to Trenton. The metadata is irrefutable. Adobe Photoshop Creative Cloud 2022, iPhone 13 Pro template, last modified at 9:15 p.m. She built the fake text messages in Photoshop screenshot by screenshot, crafting a conversation that never happened. Trenton's hand found mine under the table and squeezed hard. I could feel his pulse hammering through his palm. Martin advanced to the next slide, a screenshot of an app called TextNow installed on Blair's laptop on March 10th, 2023. TextNow is an anonymous texting service that lets users create fake phone numbers. Blair installed it a week before your wedding. The cache files show practice conversations dated March 12th through 16th. She was rehearsing the fake dialogue. At 2:34 a.m. on March 18th, hours after your wedding was canceled, she deleted the app. That deletion is consciousness of guilt. Sharon scribbled notes. Premeditation and cover-up. Beautiful. Martin clicked again, revealing an email header. The anonymous email to Trenton came from throwaway.anonymous.2023@protonmail.com. ProtonMail claims to be untraceable, but the sending IP address tells a different story, 192.16.8.1.47. That IP belongs to the Spectrum router at 2450 Pelican Crest Drive, registered under Graham Prescott's name. The device MAC address matches Blair's MacBook Pro serial number MXK32LL/A, which I confirmed via subpoenaed router logs. I felt the room tilt. Trenton's grip tightened. Martin pulled up a new slide, Blair's Google search history recovered from her Chrome browser, synced to prescottblair94@gmail.com. The timestamps were damning. March 17th, 6:12 p.m. How to fake text messages iPhone. 6:18 p.m. Best app to create fake text screenshots. 6:45 p.m. Photoshop iPhone message template free. 7:03 p.m. How to send anonymous email untraceable. 7:22 p.m. Proton Mail anonymous account setup. 8:51 p.m. Can police trace Proton Mail? All of these searches occurred in a 3-hour window on the night before your wedding. Trenton exhaled sharply. She planned the whole thing in 3 hours. Martin shook his head. No, she executed it in 3 hours. She'd been planning for months, maybe longer. Let me show you the identity theft evidence. The next section made my stomach drop. Martin displayed a table of 6 fraudulent accounts: American Express, Platinum Chase Sapphire Reserve, City Prestige, Marcus Personal Loan, Lending Club Loan, and a Mercedes-Benz financial lease, each opened between April 2023 and January 2024, all from the same IP address or Blair's iPhone 13 Pro. Every single application was submitted from your parents' house or Blair's phone. The signatures on the credit applications were forged, traced from a scanned copy of your 2021 apartment lease that Blair accessed via the family's shared Google Drive folder labeled Household Documents. Sharon looked up sharply. Forged signatures and unauthorized access to shared files add forgery and computer fraud to the charges. Martin clicked to a scanned image of a P.O. Box rental form. On February 8, 2023, 1 month before your wedding was canceled, Blair rented P.O. Box 4721 at the Newport Beach Post Office under her own name. She set up address forwarding so that all credit statements and loan correspondence for Nora Prescott were redirected to that box. You never received a single piece of mail. Postal records show the box was accessed 47 times between February 2023 and February 2024, and we have surveillance footage of Blair entering the post office on 12 separate occasions. I stared at the form at Blair's looping signature next to a photocopy of her driver's license. She had planned this, meticulously renting a P.O. Box before my wedding even fell apart preparing to steal from me while I was still planning a future with Trenton. Martin advanced to a split-screen slide, Blair's Instagram posts on one side, fraudulent transactions on the other. I cross-referenced 127 transactions with Blair's public Instagram account at Blair Prescott Official, which has 43,000 followers. September 8, 2023, $8,247 charged to your City Prestige card at Esperanza Resort in Cabo San Lucas. Blair posted a poolside photo the next day geotagged. December 15th, $6,512 at Fiana Hotel Miami Beach. She posted a suite tour video 16 hours later. February 3rd, 2024, $4,835 at Sanctuary Camelback Mountain Resort in Scottsdale. She posted a spa carousel the following day. January 27th, $15,000 down payment on a Mercedes G-Wagon lease. She posted a photo of the vehicle on January 28th with the caption, "Manifestation Works." Trenton's voice was tight with rage. She wasn't even hiding, she was showing off. Martin nodded grimly. Arrogance is often a criminal's downfall. The final piece of evidence on July 22, 2023 at 3:47 p.m. Security cameras at Neiman Marcus in Fashion Island captured Blair using your City Prestige card in your name to purchase a $4,200 Gucci handbag. Facial recognition software confirmed her identity. She looked directly at the camera while swiping your card. Sharon stood abruptly. That's a prosecutorial slam dunk. Martin flipped to the financial summary. Total fraudulent charges as of today, $385,247.18. With accrued interest and penalties, Nora, you're facing $437,430 in debt. But every single cent is traceable to Blair through IP logs, Instagram posts, surveillance footage, and transaction timestamps. This isn't circumstantial evidence, this is a digital confession. Sharon closed her folder with a sharp snap. I'm filing a criminal complaint with Detective Raymond Torres at the Newport Beach Police Department Financial Crimes Unit tomorrow morning. With this evidence, Blair will be arrested within 7 to 10 days. The charges include identity theft under California Penal Code 530.5, aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. 1028A, which carries a mandatory 2-year federal sentence wire fraud, computer fraud, forgery, and mail fraud. If convicted on all counts, Blair Prescott faces 5 to 10 years in federal prison and full restitution of $437,000. Trenton looked at me, his eyes fierce. "We have her." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of 3 weeks of investigation settle into something solid and unbreakable. "We have her." As we walked out of Sharon's office into the fading April sunlight, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started." I showed Trenton. His jaw tightened. "Forward it to Sharon now." The war wasn't over, it was just beginning. Kyle Sherman's criminal record read like a handbook for everything my sister had done to me, which made perfect sense because he was the one who taught her how. On April 12, 2024, Martin Webb dropped a supplemental forensic report on Sharon Griffin's conference table with a heavy thud that echoed through the room like a judge's gavel. Trenton and I sat across from Sharon, who was already flipping through the pages with the focused intensity of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Martin stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his expression grim. "I found the accomplice," Martin said without preamble. His name is Kyle Sherman, 41 years old, lives in Riverside, California. He's a career criminal who specializes in teaching people how to commit identity theft, and he's been coaching Blair since July of 2022, 7 months before your wedding was scheduled, Nora. I felt the blood drain from my face. Trenton's hand found mine under the table. Martin clicked his remote, and Kyle Sherman's mugshot filled the screen. A man with thinning brown hair, cold eyes, and a smirk that suggested he thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. Sherman has 2 prior federal convictions. In 2015, he served 18 months for credit card fraud. In 2018, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit identity theft and given 24 months of probation. He should have gone to prison, but he got a lenient judge. Since then, he's been operating under the radar, running a fake business called Prestige Asset Management, an LLC, with no license, no employees, and no legitimate clients. He advertises financial consulting on dark web forums and Reddit threads. But what he's really selling is step-by-step instruction on how to steal identities and avoid detection. Sharon leaned forward, pen flying across her legal pad. "How did Blair find him?" Martin pulled up an email thread recovered from Blair's MacBook Pro. The first message was dated July 15, 2022. I read Blair's words aloud, my voice shaking. "I saw your ad on Reddit. I need to open credit cards without my sister knowing. How hard is this? What's your fee?" Kyle's reply, dated 3 days later, was chilling in its casual professionalism. "Easy if you have the right information. Needs social security number, date of birth, mother's maiden name. Redirect mail to a P.O. box. Victim won't know for months. Consulting fee $5,000. Results guaranteed." Trenton's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. Martin scrolled to the next exchange. August 2nd, 2022. Blair wrote, "Deal. Can we meet in person? I have cash." Kyle replied on August 5th, "Denny's Riverside Saturday at 2 p.m. Bring the SSN docs, I'll bring the manual." Martin clicked to a new slide bank records showing a $5,000 cash withdrawal from Blair's Chase account on August 9th, 2022 at the Huntington Beach branch. Then he displayed grainy surveillance footage from a Denny's restaurant in Riverside, time-stamped August 13th, 2022 at 2:17 p.m. The video showed Blair sitting in a booth across from a man I now recognized as Kyle Sherman. They exchanged a manila envelope and a thick stack of papers. The meeting lasted 43 minutes. "What was in the envelope?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Cash," Martin confirmed. $5,000, and what Kyle gave Blair in return was a 62-page identity theft manual. We found it on her laptop in an encrypted folder labeled Financial Planning. The folder password was sistermoney2022. Sharon looked up sharply. She named the folder after you. I nodded numbly. Martin opened the manual on screen. The table of contents was a catalog of crimes, how to photograph documents without the victim's knowledge, which credit cards were easiest to get approved for, how to forge pay stubs using downloadable templates, tips for renting P.O. boxes anonymously, how to avoid detection by changing email addresses and statement delivery preferences. The final chapter was titled Legal Risks, and it included a single bold-faced warning: federal crime, 2 to 10 years in prison if caught. Blair had read that warning and proceeded anyway. Martin advanced to the next section. Blair followed Kyle's instructions to the letter. On August 20th, 2022, she submitted her first fraudulent application to American Express using one of Kyle's pay stub templates. She claimed Nora's annual income was $85,000 and changed the email on the application to a fake Gmail account. The card was approved within 48 hours with a $45,000 credit limit. I remembered that day. I had been at work at my old administrative assistant job, answering phones and filing expense reports, completely unaware that my sister was across town destroying my financial future with a few keystrokes. Martin pulled up another email dated September 2022. Blair had written to Kyle, "It worked, first card approved, $45,000 limit. You're a genius." Kyle's response made my stomach turn. "Told you. Remember our deal, 10% of everything you take. Send it to me via Venmo." Sharon's pen stopped moving. He took a cut. Martin nodded. We subpoenaed Blair's Venmo account. Over 18 months, she paid Kyle Sherman a total of $38,500, exactly 10% of the $385,000 in fraudulent charges. He profited from your stolen identity, Nora. He knew every dollar Blair spent was stolen from you, and he took his share without hesitation. Trenton stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This isn't just Blair being vindictive. This is organized crime. Exactly, Sharon said, which is why the U.S. Attorney's Office is taking over the case. The FBI Financial Crimes Task Force is already involved. Detective Raymond Torres at Newport Beach PD coordinated with Special Agent Carter at the FBI field office in Los Angeles. A federal grand jury convened on April 18th and handed down indictments for both Blair Prescott and Kyle Sherman. Martin displayed the indictment summary. Blair faced 5 federal charges: identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, computer fraud for the fake text messages to Trenton, and aggravated identity theft, which carried a mandatory 2-year prison sentence with no possibility of parole. Kyle faced 3 charges: conspiracy to commit identity theft, wire fraud, and operating an unlicensed financial services business. If convicted on all counts, Blair faced 5 to 10 years in federal prison. Kyle faced 7 to 12. Sharon closed her folder and looked directly at me. The arrest warrants were signed this morning, April 19th. They'll execute the arrests tomorrow at 7 a.m. simultaneously. Blair at your parents' house, Kyle at his apartment in Riverside. Coordinated raids to prevent either one from warning the other. She paused. Nora, do you want to be there? I hesitated for a long time, feeling the weight of the question. Part of me wanted to stay far away to let the justice system handle it without me. But another part, the part that had been silenced and exploited for 26 years, needed to see Blair's face when the truth finally caught up with her. Yes, I said quietly. I want to see her face when it happens. Sharon nodded. Detective Torres will arrange it. You'll stay in an unmarked car across the street. You won't be visible, but you'll see everything. On April 21st, 2024, I parked my Honda Civic across from 2450 Pelican Crest Drive at 6:45 in the morning. The sun was rising, painting the house in shades of gold it didn't deserve. Trenton sat beside me in silence, his hand resting on my knee. At precisely 7 o'clock, 3 police cruisers turned into the circular driveway lights, flashing but sirens silent. This was it. I watched from across the street as Blair Prescott, my sister, my burden, my torturer, was handcuffed on the front lawn of the house, where I had spent 26 years living like a ghost. The knock came at exactly 7 o'clock in the morning. I sat in my Honda Civic with Trenton beside me, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Across Pelican Crest Drive, 3 police cruisers sat in the circular driveway with their lights flashing in silent rotation, painting the pristine white facade of 2450 in alternating shades of red and blue. The sun was climbing over the roofline, but the light felt cold. Detective Raymond Torres, a man in his late 30s with close-cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, led 4 uniformed officers to the front door. He knocked 3 times, firm and authoritative, the kind of knock that left no room for misunderstanding. My father opened the door wearing his navy bathrobe, a coffee mug in one hand, his face twisted in confusion and irritation. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the quiet street. Detective Torres held up a folded document. "We have a warrant for the arrest of Blair Prescott." My father's face went from irritated to defensive in an instant. "For what? This is absurd." Before Torres could answer, I heard footsteps on the stairs inside the house. Blair appeared in the doorway behind my father wearing pajama shorts and a tank top, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, who's—" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the officers. Her entire body went rigid. "No," Blair whispered, taking a step backward. No. What is this?" Detective Torres stepped forward, his voice calm and procedural. "Blair Prescott, you are under arrest for identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, computer fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Blair screamed. It was a raw animal sound that echoed down the street and sent a flock of gulls scattering from a neighbor's roof. She turned and bolted for the stairs, but 2 officers were faster. They caught her halfway up, pulling her arms behind her back as she thrashed and kicked. "This is Nora's fault!" Blair shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. "She's lying! She's making this up!" One of the officers snapped handcuffs onto her wrists. The metallic click was audible even from where I sat. Blair was sobbing now, her mascara from the night before streaking down her face in black rivers. "Mom, Dad, do something!" My mother appeared in the doorway, her silk robe pulled tight, her face pale and stricken. She rushed toward Detective Torres, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "There's been a mistake. My daughter would never—" "Ma'am." Torres interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "We have digital evidence. Emails, bank records, Photoshop files, Instagram posts cross-referenced with fraudulent transactions. This is not a mistake." The officers were leading Blair out of the house, now her bare feet stumbling on the brick walkway. She was still screaming, still thrashing, and the neighbors were starting to emerge from their homes. Mrs. Callahan from 2448 stood on her porch in a floral housecoat, her hand over her mouth. "Mr." Vega, who jogged past our house every morning at 7:15, had stopped on the sidewalk, his earbuds dangling around his neck as he stared. My father saw them. I watched his face shift from anger to humiliation in real time. "Can you do this inside?" he hissed at Detective Torres. "This is a private matter." "This is a federal arrest, sir," Torres replied evenly. "We're following protocol." My father's jaw tightened. I could see him calculating the damage, imagining the phone calls he would have to make, the explanations he would have to give at the country club and the yacht club and the investor dinners. His reputation, the thing he valued above everything, above his daughters, above the truth, was crumbling on his own front lawn. I opened the car door and stepped out. Trenton started to follow, but I shook my head. I need to do this alone. I crossed the street slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Blair was being walked toward the nearest cruiser, an officer's hand on her elbow, when she saw me. Her tear-streaked face contorted with rage. "Nora," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "How could you do this? I'm your sister." I stopped on the sidewalk 10 feet away from her and met her eyes for the first time in over a year. "You stopped being my sister the day you stole my life," I said quietly. Blair lunged toward me, but the officer held her back. "I almost died because of you," she shrieked, her last desperate card. "You owe me." I took another step closer. My voice was steady, louder now, meant for everyone to hear. "I saved your life when I was 8 years old, and you've been punishing me for it ever since." My mother rushed toward me, her face desperate. "Nora, please drop the charges. She made a mistake." "A mistake." I turned to face her. "She planned this for months. She hired a criminal to teach her how to do it. She opened 6 fraudulent accounts in my name. She spent $385,000 of money I never borrowed. That's not a mistake. That's a calculated crime." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document that Sharon had given me the day before. I unfolded it slowly and held it up. "And since we're talking about lies, Mother Sharon subpoenaed the records from Hoag Hospital for March 17th, 2023. My mother's face went white. I handed her the paper. "Blair was never admitted. There's no intake record, no triage note, no treatment log, nothing. The emergency that canceled my wedding, it was fake." My mother stared at the document, her hands trembling. My father read over her shoulder, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to horror, to something that looked almost like shame. Blair, seated now in the back of the police cruiser, couldn't hear our conversation, but she could see her parents' faces. She was still crying, her forehead pressed against the window. I turned back to my parents. "You enabled this. You weaponized my childhood trauma. You taught her that I owed her my life. Now it's your turn. Civil lawsuit. Every asset." My father's face flushed red. "You're going to destroy your own family." "You already did that," I said. "I'm just making it official." The cruiser's engine started. Blair's sobs were muffled behind the glass as the car pulled out of the driveway, turned onto Pelican Crest Drive, and disappeared around the corner. The neighbors were still watching. My parents stood frozen on their front lawn, the hospital subpoena clutched in my mother's shaking hands. I walked back to Trenton, who was leaning against our car with his arms crossed. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Free," I said, "but freedom came with a price." In 6 days, I would face Blair again, this time in a courtroom, where the entire truth would be laid bare. And I wasn't sure I was ready to relive it all in front of strangers. August 15th, 2024, United States District Court, Central District of California, Judge Harriet Morrison presiding. The trial that would dismantle my family began with a single question. How does the defendant plead? The courtroom was nothing like I had imagined. I had pictured something from a television drama, dramatic lighting close-ups, a tense soundtrack. Instead, the Ronald Reagan Federal Building in Santa Ana was all muted beige carpet, dark wood paneling, and fluorescent overhead lights that made everyone look slightly pale. An American flag stood in the corner behind the judge's bench, motionless in the air-conditioned stillness. Rows of oak benches filled the gallery, and the jury box sat to the left, 12 ordinary Orange County residents who had been pulled from their jobs and routines to decide my sister's fate. I sat in the third row behind the prosecution table, Trenton beside me with his hand resting on mine. Sharon Griffin sat one row behind us, her legal pad already covered in notes, even though nothing had officially started. Across the aisle, my parents sat directly behind Blair, my mother's hands clutching a tissue, my father's face carved from stone. The bailiff, a gray-haired man with a U.S. Marshal's badge pinned to his chest, stood and called out in a voice that echoed off the high ceiling, "All rise. The United States District Court for the Central District of California is now in session, the Honorable Harriet Morrison presiding." We all stood. Judge Morrison entered through a door behind the bench, her black robe swishing as she climbed the steps to her seat. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She settled into her chair, surveyed the room with the calm authority of someone who had presided over hundreds of trials, and gestured for us to sit. Case number 24, CR 00347, United States of America versus Blair Prescott. The bailiff announced. Judge Morrison looked down at Blair, who sat at the defense table in a pale blue blouse and dark slacks, her hands folded in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. Beside her sat Marcus Webb, a seasoned criminal defense attorney in his 50s, with a gray suit and a calm, practiced expression. "Ms. Prescott." Judge Morrison said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You are charged with 5 counts. Identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, computer fraud, and aggravated identity theft. How do you plead?" Blair's voice was barely audible. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Judge Morrison nodded and turned to the prosecution table. Ms. Victoria, you may proceed with your opening statement. Assistant U.S. Attorney Victoria rose smoothly. She was a woman in her late 30s with black hair cut in a sharp bob, a tailored navy suit, and an air of absolute competence. She walked to the center of the courtroom, her heels clicking on the tile floor, and addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about calculated betrayal. The defendant, Blair Prescott, spent months, beginning 7 months before her sister's wedding, planning to steal her identity. When sabotaging that wedding wasn't enough to keep her sister trapped in a toxic family dynamic, she escalated to massive financial fraud. This is premeditation at its worst. Over the next few days, you will see emails in which the defendant hired a convicted fraudster to teach her how to commit identity theft. You will see Google searches in which she researched techniques. You will see Photoshop files she created to fabricate text messages. And you will see the financial devastation she caused, $385,000 in fraudulent debt that nearly destroyed her sister's life. This is not a mistake. This is a crime. She returned to her seat. Judge Morrison turned to the defense. Mr. Webb, your opening statement. Marcus Webb stood his expression sympathetic. Your Honor, members of the jury, this is a family dispute that has been blown out of proportion. Yes, Blair made poor financial decisions. Yes, she opened credit accounts without her sister's explicit permission. But she believed she was borrowing from what she considered a shared family fund. There was no criminal intent. This is a misunderstanding between siblings, not a federal crime. Victoria did not react, but I saw her jaw tighten. Judge Morrison nodded. Ms. Victoria, call your first witness. The United States calls Martin Webb certified fraud examiner. Martin walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, and took his seat. Victoria approached with a remote control in her hand, and the monitors around the courtroom flickered to life, displaying a timeline that stretched from July 2022 to February 2024. Mr. Webb. Victoria began, you conducted a forensic analysis of the defendant's laptop and financial records. Can you walk the jury through your findings? Martin nodded. Certainly. I found several key pieces of evidence. First, an application called Text Now, which allows users to create fake phone numbers and send anonymous texts. It was installed on Ms. Prescott's laptop on March 10, 2023, and deleted at 2:34 a.m. on March 18th, hours after her sister's wedding was canceled. Second, a Photoshop file named fake_texts_Nora_read.psd created on March 15th and last modified on March 17th at 9:15 p.m. This file contains fabricated text messages designed to look like a conversation between the victim, Nora Prescott, and an ex-boyfriend. Third, a series of Google searches on March 17th asking how to fake iPhone text messages, how to send anonymous emails, and whether police can trace Proton Mail accounts. Fourth, email correspondence with a convicted identity thief named Kyle Sherman, in which Ms. Prescott paid $5,000 for step-by-step instructions on how to steal her sister's identity. Victoria pulled up a side-by-side comparison on the monitors on the left, the fake text messages from Blair's Photoshop file. On the right, Nora's actual Verizon phone records showing no messages sent to anyone named Reed during the relevant time period. Mr. Webb, is it possible these activities were accidental? Victoria asked. Absolutely not, Martin said firmly. This required sustained effort, technical knowledge, and deliberate planning over many months. No further questions. Marcus Webb stood for cross-examination. Mr. Webb, isn't it possible someone else used Blair's laptop? Martin shook his head. The laptop was password protected with her personal password. Her iCloud account synced the files. The Google searches matched the exact topics she discussed with Kyle Sherman in emails sent from her account. The Photoshop file was saved under her user profile and edited multiple times over 3 days. Only one person created this evidence, Blair Prescott. Marcus Webb had no response. Victoria introduced Kyle Sherman's video deposition next. The screen showed Kyle in an orange prison jumpsuit seated in a bare interrogation room, a timestamp in the corner reading July 22, 2024. Mr. Sherman, Victoria's voice asked on the recording, did Blair Prescott pay you to teach her how to commit identity theft? Yes, Kyle said flatly. $5,000 in August 2022. I showed her how to forge documents and open credit cards in someone else's name. Did you know the victim was her sister? She told me, said her sister owed her and wouldn't notice. Marcus Webb objected, but Judge Morrison overruled it. The jury had already heard enough. Victoria stood. The evidence is overwhelming. This is not a mistake or a misunderstanding. This is theft, plain and simple. Judge Morrison banged her gavel lightly. Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow. As we filed out of the courtroom, Blair turned and looked at me, not with the rage I had expected, but with something far worse. Fear. She knew what was coming tomorrow, my testimony, and hers. Before the courtroom twist, no one saw coming. Not even me predict what happens next. Will Blair break down and confess, or will she keep lying? Comment A or B, let me see who's been paying attention, because this is the moment that decides everything. The courtroom falls silent. 12 jurors stare. The judge waits. And me, I'm sitting there gripping Trenton's hand, knowing the next few seconds will shape the rest of my life. Will 18 years of pain finally be answered? Will the truth win? Fair warning, the story ahead dramatizes real themes. If that makes you uncomfortable, now's the time to pause. But if you're ready to witness it, stay. Because what comes next, it's worth it. When I stepped up to the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible, I wasn't just swearing to tell the truth, I was swearing that I would finally be free of the lies that had imprisoned me. The courtroom felt smaller from this angle, the jury box closer, the judge's bench higher. Every face turned toward me. The bailiff's voice echoed, "Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God." I do. But first Trenton had testified. Victoria had called him to the stand that morning, and he had walked up with the same quiet strength he always carried. When she asked him to describe March 17th, 2023, his voice had been steady but strained. I received an anonymous email at 10:32 p.m. with screenshots that claimed my fiancé still loved her ex-boyfriend and was only marrying me for financial security. They looked real. I panicked. I called Nora immediately. "What happened?" Victoria had asked. She denied it. She begged me to believe her, but I couldn't shake the doubt. At 2 a.m, I called her ex-boyfriend Reed to verify. He confirmed the messages were fake, but by then the wedding was already canceled. His voice had cracked. I lost a year with the woman I love because of those lies. We should have been building a life together. Instead, we spent a year apart, both of us in pain. When Victoria called me to the stand, I walked up, feeling the weight of 18 years pressing on my shoulders. "Ms. Prescott," she began gently, "why did you stay in that house for so long despite the abuse?" I took a breath. Because when I was 8 years old, my 4-year-old sister nearly drowned in our pool. I jumped in and saved her life. But my parents blamed me for not watching her closely enough. For 18 years, they used that guilt to control me. How? Every time I wanted something for myself, friends, hobbies, college, housing, my own life, they reminded me of that day. "Remember when Blair almost died because of you?" As if I had tried to hurt her instead of saving her. Victoria pulled up a photograph of a worn spiral notebook on the monitors. "What is this?" "A record I kept of every time Blair borrowed money from me. Starting when she was 12, she would demand loans. You owe me, remember. You almost let me die. Over 14 years, she took $45,000. She never repaid a cent." A woman in the front row of the jury wiped her eyes. "What happened when you left?" Victoria asked. "I cut off her financial access, so she found another way my credit. She felt entitled to it. In her mind, I owed her my life, so why not my identity?" Victoria's voice softened. "How did this affect you?" My hands trembled, but my voice stayed firm. "I spent 18 years believing I was only valuable based on what I could give, that I deserved to sacrifice my happiness for everyone else's. Blair didn't just steal my money. She stole my wedding day, my self-worth, and she almost stole my future." The defense attorney's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. "Didn't you abandon your family, Ms. Prescott?" "I freed myself from abuse." "You cut them off financially." "I stopped letting them exploit me. There's a difference." He had no response. Then Marcus Webb made his fatal mistake. He called Blair to the stand. She walked up slowly, dressed in a gray suit that made her look younger and more fragile than she was. Her hands shook as she placed them on the Bible. When Webb asked her to describe her relationship with me, her voice was rehearsed and tearful. Nora was always so responsible, so smart. I looked up to her. When she left, I panicked. I made bad choices. It was a performance, and the jury looked unmoved. Victoria stood for cross-examination, and I saw Blair's shoulders tense. Ms. Prescott, can you explain the Photoshop file titled Nora_read_texts_final.psd on your laptop, created March 10, 2023? Ohainiu aswens. Blair froze. I don't remember making that. You don't remember your search history shows how to fake text messages on March 5th. 5 days later, you created this file. 7 days later, those exact messages destroyed your sister's wedding. Coincidence. Blair's voice rose. She was going to leave. She was going to abandon me. Her lawyer grabbed her arm. Blair, don't... But she was already standing. Her face flushed, her voice breaking. She was supposed to stay. She was supposed to take care of me. That was her job. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Blair was crying now, uncontrollable and raw. I just wanted to stop the wedding. If they broke up, she'd come home. She'd remember she owed me, but she still left. She abandoned me. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her voice cold and sharp. Ms. Prescott, are you confessing that you deliberately sabotaged your sister's wedding and committed identity theft? Blair seemed to realize what she had said, her eyes widening. Her lawyer was pulling her back into her seat, but she kept talking, the words spilling out like a dam had burst. She owed me from the pool. She almost let me die. Officer, escort Ms. Prescott out, Judge Morrison ordered. We are in recess. The bailiff stepped forward as Blair collapsed into sobs. My parents sat frozen in the gallery, my mother's hand covering her mouth, my father's face buried in his hands. In the hallway, an hour later, I heard Marcus Webb's furious whisper as he cornered Blair near the restrooms. You just confessed to premeditation on the witness stand. Do you understand what you've done? Court reconvened an hour later. The defense requested a recess to discuss plea options, but the damage was done. Blair's collapse had handed the prosecution a victory on a silver platter. August 29, 2024. Judge Morrison's gavel struck once, twice, 3 times, and with it my family's empire crumbled to dust. The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled, reporters in the back row with their notepads ready, my parents sitting pale and silent behind the defense table, where Blair stood trembling beside Marcus Webb. Trenton sat beside me in the front row, his hand warm and steady over mine. Will the defendant please rise? Judge Morrison said. Blair stood on shaking legs, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She had lost weight in the 2 weeks since her breakdown on the witness stand, her face hollow, dark circles under her eyes. Judge Morrison turned to the jury. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a somber expression, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of identity theft under California Penal Code 530.5. How do you find guilty? Blair's knees buckled. Marcus Webb caught her elbow. On the charge of wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the charge of computer fraud, guilty. On the charge of aggravated identity theft under 18 U.S.C. 1028A, guilty. Blair sank into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Behind her, my mother wept openly. My father sat frozen, staring straight ahead. Judge Morrison waited for the courtroom to settle before she spoke again. Her voice was measured, calm, and final. Ms. Blair Prescott, you orchestrated a multi-layered scheme to control and defraud your sister. You weaponized childhood trauma to manipulate her for 18 years. You sabotaged her wedding with fabricated evidence. You hired a convicted criminal to teach you how to steal her identity. You accumulated $385,000 in fraudulent debt in her name. Your confession in this courtroom confirmed malice and premeditation. The court finds your actions reprehensible." She paused, her eyes never leaving Blair's face. "On the charge of identity theft, I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison. On the charge of aggravated identity theft, which carries a mandatory consecutive sentence, I add 2 years. Total sentence 7 years in a federal correctional facility. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $435,000, $385,000 in fraudulent charges, plus $50,000 in punitive damages. You are also fined $75,000. Upon release, you will serve 5 years of supervised release and are prohibited from opening any credit accounts for 10 years. Remand to custody is immediate." 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward. Blair turned to look at our parents one last time before the marshals led her away through the side door. She didn't look at me. The gavel struck again. "Court is adjourned." Later that week, Sharon Griffin called me. "The civil lawsuit is moving forward. Your parents have 2 options: fight it in court, which will cost them hundreds of thousands in legal fees and expose every detail to the public, or settle." "What do you think they'll do?" I asked. "They'll settle," Sharon said confidently. "They've already lost their daughter to prison and their reputation to gossip. They won't want a public trial dissecting their enabling behavior." She was right. On September 7th, Graham and Gail Prescott signed a settlement agreement. The terms were simple and devastating. They would pay Blair's $435,000 in restitution, liquidate assets to cover it, sign a 10-year no-contact order with me, and provide a written admission that they had weaponized the pool incident to control me for 18 years. Within 3 weeks, the empire began to fall. The house at 2450 Pelican Crest Drive, the house where I had spent 26 years as an invisible servant, sold for $4.2 million, a loss from the $4.8 million my parents had paid for it years earlier. The Park City condo sold for $1.15 million. My father's Porsche went for $95,000. My mother's jewelry collection brought in $42,000. Investment accounts were liquidated. After restitution and legal fees, my parents were left with approximately $4.5 million. They moved into a rented apartment in Irving. Their social circle shattered, their country club memberships quietly revoked. While their world collapsed, mine rebuilt itself. The credit bureaus deleted every fraudulent account from my file within 30 days of the verdict. My credit score climbed from 510 to 780 higher than it had ever been. My debt dropped to 0. When I resubmitted my application to SoCo Lofts in Costa Mesa, it was approved within 48 hours. At work, CloudSync Solutions promoted me to Senior Operations Manager with a salary of $110,000. My supervisor told me she admired my resilience. On September 15th, I drove through Newport Beach one last time before heading to my new apartment. I didn't plan to stop at 2450 Pelican Crest Drive, but I found myself slowing as I passed. A sold sign stood in the front yard. A moving truck sat in the driveway. My father carried a box down the front steps. My mother followed with a smaller one, her face drawn and tired. They looked older, smaller, diminished. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I just kept driving. Blair was 200 miles north in F. Seawarn, Dublin, a federal women's prison beginning a 7-year sentence. Kyle Sherman was serving 3 years in a men's facility and had been fined $100,000. I drove to Costa Mesa to 3303 Highland Avenue to Unit 712 on the 7th floor of a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Trenton was waiting outside the entrance with a bottle of wine in one hand and my apartment keys in the other. He handed me the keys with a smile. "Welcome home." We rode the elevator up in silence, unlocked the door together, and stepped into an empty living room filled with sunlight and unpacked boxes. Trenton poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. "To justice," he asked. "To freedom," I corrected. We clinked glasses in the empty living room surrounded by unpacked boxes and infinite possibilities. And then Trenton set his glass down and said, "Nora, there's something I want to ask you." Trenton Pierce didn't get down on one knee with some grand public gesture. He knelt in my living room amid the last few unpacked boxes and asked me to build a life with him from 0. It was September 20th, 5 days after I had moved into the loft at 3303 Highland Avenue. Most of the apartment had taken shape by then. The couch sat against the wall beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Costa Mesa skyline. A small dining table stood near the kitchen, mismatched chairs borrowed from Lindsay until I could buy my own. A few cardboard boxes remained stacked in the corner, waiting to be unpacked, but the space finally felt like home. Trenton had brought Thai takeout, pad Thai tom yum soup and mango sticky rice, my favorites, and we sat on the floor eating straight from the containers, the way we used to when we were dating 3 years ago. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind of silence between bites that didn't need to be filled. "Do you remember when we first came here?" Trenton asked, suddenly setting down his container. "When your application was rejected because of your credit?" I nodded. "Because of debt I didn't even know existed. And now you're here," he said, his voice soft. "You fought for this, Nora. You earned it." "We earned it," I corrected. "You stood by me through everything. You could have walked away when things got ugly." "I never considered it." He stood up, then brushing crumbs off his jeans, and I saw something shift in his expression. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. 18 months ago. Trenton began, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. "Someone tried to convince me that you didn't love me, that you were marrying me for money. For a few hours I doubted you, and I've regretted that doubt every single day since." He dropped to one knee in the middle of the living room, surrounded by takeout containers and the last remnants of a life I was still piecing together. "I don't have some elaborate speech prepared on," he said. "I don't have the ring I bought for our first engagement that one felt cursed, honestly. But I have this." He opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum band with a single round-cut diamond, elegant, and understated nothing like the flashy ring I vaguely remembered from the first proposal. "Will you marry me?" Trenton asked, his eyes never leaving mine. "Not because we once planned it, not because it's expected, but because I choose you every day for the rest of my life. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Tears blurred my vision, but I was smiling. "You realize my family is in ruins because of me, right?" "Because of them," he corrected firmly. "You just held them accountable. You doubted me once." "One night," he said. "And I've spent every day since proving I'll never do it again. I'm here, Nora. I'm always here." I laughed through the tears, nodding. "Yes, God, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly. We stayed there for a long moment, kneeling on the floor, holding each other in the quiet certainty that this time nothing would stop us. Later, we sat cross-legged on the couch, planning a wedding that looked nothing like the one we had lost. "Not Napa Valley," I said firmly. "Too many sad memories." "Where then?" "Somewhere small, real, only people who truly love us." We talked for hours, sketching out a vision that felt right. Crystal Cove State Park, a beach ceremony at sunset. December 21st, the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year when the light begins to return. 30 guests maximum, intimate, meaningful, simple. "Lindsay will be my maid of honor," I said. "Morgan and Emma as bridesmaids. My brother as best man," Trenton said. "Mrs. Crawford and Mr. Brennan," I added. "The people who showed up when my family didn't." Trenton hesitated, then asked, "Should we invite Reed?" I blinked, surprised. "My ex-boyfriend." "As closure," Trenton explained. "He helped us that night, even at 2 a.m. He deserves to know the truth came out." I considered it, then nodded slowly. "Actually, yes, he does." We fell quiet for a moment, and then I asked the question that had been circling my mind. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd gotten married that day in 2023? Trenton looked at me carefully. "Honestly, I don't think we would have lasted." I stared at him. "Why not?" "Because you hadn't faced the truth about your family yet," he said gently. "You would have carried that guilt into our marriage, Nora. You would have believed you owed them something, that you had to sacrifice yourself to keep the peace. It would have poisoned us eventually." I sat back, the realization settling over me like a weight lifting. "You're right. I wasn't free then. I was running away from them, not running toward you." "Now you're free," Trenton said. "And now we can build something real." I took his hand, feeling the cool metal of the engagement ring against my palm. My whole life I was only valued for what I could do: clean the house, manage the schedules, pay Blair's debts. You're the first person who valued me for who I am. Trenton smiled. Then spend the rest of your life proving that's enough. We sat together as the sun set over Costa Mesa, the city lights blinking on one by one, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Hope. Love. A future I had chosen for myself. December 21st felt both impossibly far away and right around the corner. But first, I had one more thing to do: write the ending I deserved. Not just for the trial, but for my story. For myself. December 21st, 2024. The sun set over Crystal Cove at exactly 5:47 p.m., painting the ocean in gold, and for the first time in my life, I was no longer afraid of the light. 30 white chairs sat in 2 rows on the sand, a simple aisle running between them. A driftwood arch stood at the water's edge, woven with white roses and eucalyptus. The sound of waves rolled in soft and steady, punctuated by the distant cry of seagulls. A string quartet played something gentle and wordless. The air smelled like salt and flowers. I stood barefoot at the top of the beach in a simple white silk dress, my hand resting in Lindsay's. She wore dusty blue and had tears in her eyes before the ceremony even started. "You ready?" she whispered. "I've been ready for 21 months, I said. The music shifted. Here Comes the Sun drifted over the beach, and Morgan and Emma walked down the aisle first in seafoam green, then Lindsay. When the string quartet played the opening chords of the processional, every guest stood and turned. I stepped onto the sand and started walking. The sun was low on the horizon, golden light washing over everything, and when I looked up, I saw Trenton standing at the arch with his brother beside him. His hands were clasped in front of him, his face already streaked with tears. I walked toward him, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. When I reached the arch, Lindsay squeezed my hand and stepped aside. Trenton took both my hands in his, and the world shrank to just us. Judge Harriet Morrison stood between us, the same judge who had presided over Blair's trial 4 months earlier. She smiled her voice, carrying over the sound of the waves. "Nora and Trenton, your journey to this moment has not been easy. You have faced lies, betrayal, and forces designed to tear you apart. But you have also faced the truth about yourselves, about each other, and about what real love requires. Love is not perfection. It is not blind trust. It is choice. Every day you choose each other. That is marriage. That is what you have already done. Today just makes it official." She nodded to Trenton. "Your vows." Trenton took a breath, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Nora, someone once tried to use lies to tear us apart. They made me doubt you for one night and I failed you. But you taught me that real love doesn't break from one moment of doubt. It grows stronger when we fight through it together. I vow to trust you, to choose you to fight for us every single day. No more doubt, no more fear, just us, just this moment." Judge Morrison turned to me. "Nora, your vows." My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. "Trenton, when I was 8 years old, I saved my sister's life. My parents made me believe that meant I owed her mine. For 18 years, I thought I was only valuable when I was useful. I didn't know what it was like to be loved just for existing. You showed me. When my family tried to take you from me, I realized you're not just my partner. You're my family. The family I chose. The family I deserve. I vow to trust you, to be vulnerable with you, to build a life that is ours, not dictated by guilt, not controlled by fear. Just ours. I love you. Let's go home." We exchanged simple platinum rings, and when Trenton slid mine onto my finger, he whispered, "With this ring, I choose you." "With this ring," I whispered back, "I choose us." Judge Morrison's smile widened. "By the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you married. Trenton, you may kiss your bride finally." He did. The sun touched the horizon as we kissed, bathing everything in gold, and behind us, our 30 guests erupted in applause. A seagull flew overhead at the exact right moment, and I laughed against Trenton's lips. At Last by Etta James played, as we walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, flower petals falling around us like soft rain. Later at the winery restaurant in Newport Beach, we danced our first dance in a private room filled with the people who had chosen to love us. Lindsay gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Trenton's brother welcomed me into their family with warmth I had never known from my own. As we swayed to the music, Trenton whispered, "We did it." "Yes," I said. 18 months, a lawsuit, and a prison sentence later, we finally did it. "Was it worth it?" I looked up at him. "Every second, because now I know this is real. No one can take it from us anymore." Reed appeared later with his fiancée, both smiling. "Congratulations, Nora," he said. "I'm glad the truth came out." "Thank you for verifying those messages were fake," I told him. "You helped save us." His fiancée touched my arm. "You're incredibly strong." We shook hands, and I felt the past finally settle into peace. That night in the house Trenton and I had bought together in Irvine, I sat at my laptop with a mug of hot chocolate while he adjusted the lights on our Christmas tree. I typed the final words of a story I had been writing for 27 years. My name is Nora Cameron now, not Nora Prescott, and I've never been happier. I closed the laptop. "Done?" Trenton asked, sitting beside me. "Yes, I think I finally told the whole story." "How does it feel?" "Like closing a book I've been writing my entire life." We sat in comfortable silence watching the tree lights blink. "Do you think Blair regrets it?" I asked. "I think she regrets getting caught, not the actions." "Good. 7 years to think about what she destroyed." "She didn't destroy us," Trenton said. "She tried, but we rebuilt, stronger." I raised my mug. "To second chances. To choosing each other," he said. "Every day." We clinked mugs and kissed, and outside the world kept turning. But inside, we had finally found peace. And to you listening to this story, remember, this God gave me the strength to walk away when staying felt easier. For 18 years, I believed sacrifice was love. But God didn't create me to be invisible. He created me whole, worthy, and free. If you're trapped in family betrayal right now, drowning in guilt they planted in your chest, hear me. You don't owe them your future just because they gave you a past. Family revenge isn't plotting their downfall. It's building a life so full of peace they can't reach you anymore. My sister stole my wedding, my credit, my identity. My parents weaponized childhood trauma for 2 decades, and God used their worst intentions to set me free. Don't be like I was, silent, shrinking, convincing yourself that endurance equals virtue. Family betrayal cuts deepest because you never see it coming from people who should protect you. But family revenge isn't bitterness. It's choosing yourself without apology. I spent a year in courtrooms proving what they did. I spent the rest of my life proving what I deserved. Here's my truth. The bridge I burned lit the path forward. The family I chose loves me better than the one I was born into, and the wedding I finally had. It was small, real, and mine. So if you've been the scapegoat, the fixer, the invisible one, leave. Rebuild. God will meet you on the other side. If this story resonated with you, tell me in the comments, what would you do in Nora's shoes? Share this with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more stories that matter. Thank you for staying until the end. A gentle reminder, upcoming stories contain fictionalized elements for educational purposes. If this doesn't serve you, explore content that does. You deserve it.